My name is Abigail Hayes, but you can call me Abby. At 39, I've carved out a solid life for myself as a structural engineer right here in Austin, Texas. I spend my days designing bridges, massive structures of steel and concrete engineered to connect communities, to bear immense weight, and to stand defiant against the fiercest storms. There's a bitter irony in that, because the bridge to my own family was on the verge of a catastrophic failure, and I was the only one who seemed to notice the stress fractures. The moment of total collapse came, as these things often do, on a Sunday. It happened over a glazed ham that was growing cold on my mother's dining room table. The air in that house was always heavy with things left unsaid, a silence so thick you could feel it pressing in on you. My parents, Robert and Susan, were there. So was my younger brother Ethan and his flashy new wife, Tiffany. Before we go any further, I'd love to know where you're joining me from tonight. It's a great comfort to know how far a story can travel, and who it might reach. Let me know in the comments what city or state you're in. And if this story is already speaking to you, please take a moment to press that like button and subscribe. It helps more than you know and ensures you won't miss how this all unfolds. My return to my parents' home in Austin was never in the 5-year plan, let alone the 10-year one. A decade ago, I was on a fast track to a senior partnership in Seattle, a city I adored. I had a life there, friends, hiking trails, a future that was mine. But then came the call. My father, Robert, had a heart attack. It wasn't the big one, but it was a siren in the night. When I flew home, the reality of their situation was laid bare on the kitchen counter: stacks of unopened bills, a second notice from the power company, and a foreclosure warning from the bank. My father's pride is as big as the Texas sky, but his financial acumen was a disaster. They were drowning. So, I did what I thought a good daughter should do. I turned down the promotion in Seattle. I arranged a transfer to my firm's Austin office, and I moved back into my childhood bedroom, with its faded floral wallpaper and ghosts of teenage dreams. I told everyone, including myself, that it was just temporary, but temporary became my permanent state of being. I wasn't just their daughter anymore, I was their financial lifeline. My salary, earned through grueling 60-hour weeks overseeing rebar installations and concrete pours, became a direct deposit into their survival. It paid for new energy, efficient windows to cut down the blistering summer cooling bills. It paid for a complete rewiring of the house's dangerously outdated electrical system. It paid off the mountain of high-interest credit card debt my father had accumulated. I was the silent, invisible partner in the business of keeping my family afloat. My father would accept the money with a grunt that I was supposed to interpret as gratitude, but his praise, his actual attention, was a currency reserved exclusively for my brother. Ethan was a visionary, which is the kind way of saying he was a man allergic to a steady job. He pinballed from one half-baked business idea to the next. First, it was a craft kombucha brewery in the garage that was shut down by the health department for, and I quote, a shocking number of sanitation violations. After that came his brilliant dropshipping scheme for novelty socks, which ended with him losing thousands of our parents' dwindling savings to a supplier who simply vanished. After each spectacular failure, Dad would clap him on the back. "Well, son, you took your swing. That's the entrepreneurial spirit," he'd say. Meanwhile, my quiet, consistent success, the very thing keeping a roof over their heads, was treated like wallpaper, functional, necessary, but completely unremarkable. The family dynamic went from dysfunctional to toxic the day Ethan brought Tiffany home. She presented herself as a top-tier real estate agent, a whirlwind of power suits, sharp angles, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was polished, beautiful, and my parents were utterly captivated. "Now, she's got a good head on her shoulders," Dad would boom after she'd visited. "This one's a winner, son. A real go-getter." I watched her across the dinner table, a knot of suspicion tightening in my gut. She drove a brand new Escalade and wore a gold watch that cost more than my first car. For a real estate agent in her late 20s, even in Austin's hot market, it felt performative. She spoke in a dizzying flurry of buzzwords: 131 exchanges, opportunity zones, leveraging assets, that made my father's eyes light up with dollar signs. Ethan just sat beside her, beaming like he'd won the Powerball. I tried to connect with her. asking about market trends in the neighborhoods she specialized in. Her answers were always slick but vague, quickly pivoting to some massive seven-figure deal she was supposedly about to close. I noticed other things too. The constant stream of shopping bags from high-end boutiques, which she'd explain away as gifts from grateful clients. Ethan, blinded by her glamour, never questioned a thing. He just puffed out his chest and bragged about his powerhouse wife. I tried, gently, to talk to my mother. Doesn't Tiffany's lifestyle seem a little extravagant for her age? I asked one evening as we did the dishes. Mom just shrugged, her hands deep in the soapy water. She's a successful woman, Abigail. Don't be so jealous. It's nice that Ethan finally found someone with some ambition. It wasn't jealousy, it was simple math. My six-figure salary was stretched to the breaking point, keeping that household solvent. Yet Tiffany was living the life of a millionaire heiress. The part that chilled me to the bone was how she began to expertly maneuver herself into the center of our family's finances. She started advising my father, talking about consolidating his accounts and exploring new investment vehicles. They'd sit at the dining room table for hours, papers spread between them, her voice a low, confidential hum. I felt like I was watching a python slowly coil around its prey. If I tried to join in, to mention that I just paid the hefty quarterly property tax bill, Dad would wave me away. Not now, Abigail. Tiffany is explaining a high-yield asset to me. I was the family workhorse, good for pulling the plow, but not welcome in the boardroom. That Sunday evening, I walked into the dining room braced for the usual tension. Just as Dad was about to carve the ham, the front door flew open. Ethan strode in, grinning from ear to ear, dragging two enormous suitcases. Tiffany followed, her heels clicking an arrogant rhythm on the hardwood floor. Big announcement, Ethan declared, dropping the bags with a thud. We're moving in. Sloane gave a tight, victorious smile, her eyes scanning the room not like a guest, but like a general surveying conquered territory. My stomach plummeted. This wasn't a visit, it was an occupation. My father didn't look surprised at all. He put the carving knife down, and his cold, gray eyes found mine. Abigail, he said, his voice flat. Tiffany and Ethan are moving in. We've decided you can take the guest room in the basement. Or, if that's not acceptable to you, you can find your own place. The words didn't register at first. The guest room, a damp, cramped space with a single high window that looked out onto a concrete drainage well. What? The word was a strangled whisper. Ethan smirked, leaning back in his chair. Be practical, Abby. We need your room for our home office. Tiffany's business is blowing up. The injustice of it was a physical blow. Hold on, I said, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't felt in years. I've paid the mortgage on this house for the last 7 years. I paid for the new air conditioner, the plumbing overhaul, the very paint on these walls. I bought the new stainless steel refrigerator you're about to eat food out of, and you want to relegate me to the basement. I looked at my dad, pleading with him to see how insane this was. He just sighed, a long, exasperated sound. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet, Abigail, he said, as if my entire adult life had been one long, freeloading vacation. Ethan and Tiffany need a stable foundation to build their future. They have plans. Plans. The word erupted out of me, sharp with a decade of resentment. Ethan's plans have the shelf life of a carton of milk, and always end with me writing a check to clean up the mess. I am the only reason this family has a foundation at all, and you know it. That's when Ethan leaned forward, his grin twisting into a sneer. Face it, Abby. You're not exactly a key player here. You're just here, that was it. The final killing blow. I had sacrificed my career, my savings, my own future for them. And I was just here. My father slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses jump. Nof, he roared. This is not a debate. They are my son and his wife. This is their home. End of discussion. I made one last, desperate appeal to my mother. Say something, I begged with my eyes. Please. But she just sat there, a statue of silent complicity, twisting her napkin in her lap. I pushed my chair back, the screech echoing in the sudden silence. You're right, I said, my voice dangerously calm. This isn't a debate. I stood up, feeling steadier than I should have. I'm gone. But I didn't just pack a bag. I conducted a full-scale repossession. I started in the living room, unplugging the 70-inch OLED TV and the surround sound system I'd bought them for Christmas. I went to the kitchen and packed the high-end espresso machine I used every morning. I took the blender, the air fryer, and the set of German steel knives. From the hallway, I unmounted the smart thermostat I'd installed. My father stood in the doorway, his arms crossed. "You're making a fool of yourself, Abigail." "No," I said, hauling a box towards the front door I'd had replaced and paid for. "I'm just taking back what's mine." I had a U-Haul trailer hitched to my truck within the hour. With every single item I loaded, the plush sectional sofa, the new washer and dryer, even the expensive lawnmower from the garage, I felt a decade of weight falling from my shoulders. I wasn't just leaving a house. I was reclaiming my life. A few days later, I was starting to feel the first glimmers of what it was to be human again. I'd found a small but bright one-bedroom apartment downtown, with a balcony that overlooked the city skyline. A place that was entirely, unequivocally mine. My old mentor from the firm, Carla, a woman with a steel-trapped mind and a heart as big as Texas, had helped me find it. The first night, she showed up not with sympathy, but with a 6-pack of Shiner Bock and a pound of brisket from the best joint in town. We sat on my salvaged sofa cushions on the floor, making plans. "You've been carrying that family like a cross for a decade, Abby," she'd said, her voice devoid of pity. "It's about time you put it down." She was right. I was slowly unlearning the habit of living for others, and starting the difficult work of rebuilding for myself. But even as I arranged my furniture and rediscovered my own life, I couldn't shake the deep, structural unease about Tiffany. Her story had more holes in it than a rusty bridge girder. On a hunch, I called an old colleague, Frank, a general contractor I'd worked with on a dozen projects. He was sharp, knew everyone in the Austin development and real estate scene, and didn't suffer fools. "Frank, it's Abby Hayes. I've got a strange one for you." I laid it all out: my brother's new wife, Tiffany Cole, her claims of being a real estate mogul, the Escalade, the Rolex, the whole 9 yards. There was a long, thoughtful pause on the other end of the line. "Tiffany Cole," he finally said, and his voice dropped half an octave. "Yeah, that name's been floating around, and not in a good way. The brokerage she's with, Vanguard Properties. They're vultures, Abby. Word on the street is they specialize in some real shady stuff. Predatory loans targeting seniors. Fraudulent appraisals to inflate property values. Shell corporations to hide the money. Nothing's stuck to them yet, but where there's smoke in this business, there's a wildfire." A chill snaked down my spine. It was even worse than I'd imagined. I thanked Frank and, with my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I dialed my father's number. "Dad, you have to listen to me," I began, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I spoke to a friend in the construction business. Tiffany's company is being investigated for major fraud." His response was a wall of ice. "Don't you dare, Abigail. Don't you dare try to poison this family because you're bitter. Your brother is finally making something of himself, and you can't stand it." He hung up before I could say another word. Frustrated and shaking, I called my mother, hoping for a sliver of reason. "Mom, please, just hear me out," I pleaded, explaining the red flags, the investigation, the immense risk they were in. She just sighed, a sound worn thin by years of willful ignorance. "Abigail, please, let it be. Your brother is so happy for the first time in his life. Don't you go and ruin this for him. Ruin it for him." They were standing on the tracks with a freight train bearing down on them, and she was worried about upsetting Ethan's delicate feelings. I hung up the phone feeling completely and utterly alone, but my fear was now forged into a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just suspicious anymore. I was on a mission to uncover the truth. I spent the next week of my life digging. As an engineer, my mind is trained to find structural weaknesses, to read blueprints, and to see the stress points others miss. I applied that same methodical precision to Tiffany's life. I spent hours online, poring over public records. I found property deeds in her name that had been bought and sold in a matter of weeks with impossibly high profit margins. I cross-referenced LLCs registered in the state, and found her name linked as a managing partner to a company that had been sued in Arizona for predatory lending practices. Each new discovery was another load, bearing pillar in the fraudulent structure she had built. 2 weeks after I'd moved out, I ran into an old neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, at the grocery store. She'd lived across the street from my parents for 30 years. After we exchanged pleasantries, her expression turned grave. "Abby dear, I'm so worried about your parents," she said, lowering her voice. "A man came by the other day in a car, asking for your father. He said he was a process server. He had a thick envelope of legal papers." My stomach felt like it had been filled with concrete. It was happening. The collapse was starting. I drove straight to my parents' house. I had to try one last time. Ethan was in the front yard, meticulously polishing Tiffany's Escalade. "We need to talk now," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. In the living room, I laid it all out for them. The investigation Frank had mentioned, the lawsuits in Arizona, the process server Mrs. Henderson had seen. I had printed out the documents and put them in a folder. "She's a con artist," I said, my voice steady. "She's using all of you." Ethan snatched the file from my hand, his face twisting into a mask of pure rage as he scanned the first page. "You're making this up," he spat, throwing the papers onto the floor. "You're pathetic and jealous. You can't stand to see me win for once in my life." My father stood by the fireplace, his face a stony mask. "Get out of my house, Abigail. Take your lies and your poison and get out." My mother just wrung her hands, whispering, "You're upsetting your father." I left, the door slamming shut behind me with a sound of utter finality. They had been given the structural analysis, the engineer's report warning of imminent danger, and they had chosen to condemn the building anyway. They had chosen the beautiful, deadly lie over the hard, saving truth. That night, as I sat in the quiet of my own apartment, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some instinct made me answer. "Hello. Is this Abigail Hayes?" A man's professional voice asked. "This is Detective Martinez with the Austin Police Department, Economic Crimes Division. We're conducting an investigation into a Ms. Tiffany Cole. Your name came up as a close family member. We have reason to believe your parents may be the victims of a significant financial fraud scheme." I closed my eyes, a wave of cold, terrible validation washing over me. The bridge was no longer just cracking. It was collapsing. And I was the only one who had been watching it happen all along. A week later, I was at my drafting table, trying to lose myself in the elegant physics of a new cantilever bridge design, when my phone buzzed. It was my mother. Her voice was a frayed thread of pure terror. Abby, there are police officers at the door. They have a warrant. They're asking about Tiffany." "Don't say anything. I'm on my way," I said, my voice calm and clear, a stark contrast to the adrenaline dumping into my system. I was already grabbing my keys. When I pulled onto their street, it was bathed in the chaotic strobe of flashing red and blue lights. Two unmarked sedans were parked at the curb. I saw Detective Martinez and another plainclothes officer on the porch speaking to my father. His face, normally a mask of stern authority, was slack and ashen. Ethan was pacing the lawn like a caged animal, his hands raking through his hair as he muttered to himself. "This is in regard to a series of fraudulent real estate transactions and wire fraud," Detective Martinez was explaining to my father, his voice professionally detached. "We have substantial evidence that Miss Cole used forged legal documents, misappropriated client escrow funds, and engaged in a pattern of predatory lending. We have a warrant to search the premises for any and all financial records." Ethan's head snapped up. His eyes, wide with a child's panic, found my mother's in the doorway. "She's lying," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "Mom, tell them! Tell me she's lying!" My mother just stood there, paralyzed, a hand pressed to her lips as if to physically hold in a scream. The detectives calmly explained the full scope of the scheme. Tiffany hadn't just been draining investment accounts she'd managed. For them, she had expertly used my brother's identity and credit to secure a series of high-interest business loans for companies that existed only on paper. But the killing blow was this. She had convinced my father to sign papers for a second mortgage on the house, a massive line of credit that she had systematically drained and funneled into a web of offshore accounts. The house was leveraged to the hilt. She isn't here." My father finally managed to choke out, his voice a hoarse whisper. As the detectives handed him their card and explained the next steps, I saw it. Across the street, parked deep in the shadows of an old oak tree, was Tiffany's black Escalade. The engine was off. She must have seen the police cars and was lying in wait. She hadn't spotted me yet. Acting on pure, cold instinct, I walked calmly across the street, pulling out my phone. I unlocked it, opened the voice recorder app, and hit record, keeping the phone down at my side. "Tiffany," I said, my voice even. She jumped, her head whipping around. Her perfectly made, up face was a mask of raw fear. "What do you want, Abigail?" she hissed, her hand already on the car door handle. I stood my ground, just a few feet from her window. "It's over. I know about the second mortgage. The fake loans in Ethan's name. The money you stole. I just want to know why you did it to them." Her composure finally shattered. The sophisticated mask fell away, revealing something venomous and desperate. "Fine," she snapped, her voice sharp as broken glass. "You want to know why? Because they were fools!" Your father was so desperate to believe he was a financial genius that he signed every single paper I put in front of him without reading a word. And your brother? He was so stupid and blinded by a pretty face. He would have signed his own death certificate if I'd asked him to. They got what they deserved for being so weak and trusting. Every word was a nail in her coffin, a perfect, clear confession captured by my phone's microphone. "You destroyed them," I said, my voice low with a disgust so profound it felt like it was physically sickening me. She actually let out a short, bitter laugh. "They were easy marks. That's on them, not me." Before I could say another word, she was in the car, the engine roaring to life. The tires screeched as she peeled away from the curb and vanished into the night. She was gone. And in her wake, she'd left a financial crater that had swallowed my family's entire world. I walked back to the house, the weight of her confession heavy in my pocket. Ethan had collapsed onto the porch steps, sobbing. How could she do this? How? He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen with tears and disbelief. "Abby, you knew. You tried to warn us. Why didn't you do more? Why didn't you stop her?" I just stared at him, the last vestiges of my pity incinerated by a cold, hard anger. "Do more?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "I tried, Ethan. I begged all of you to listen. You called me jealous. Your father threw me out of this house. You chose her lie over my truth at every single turn." My father had sunk into one of the porch chairs, his head in his hands, looking like a man who had aged a lifetime in the last hour. My mother was finally weeping, silent tears streaming down her face, her silence a confession of her own complicity. Later that night my phone rang. It was my father. His voice was broken, stripped of all its bluster and authority. "Abigail, we're ruined," he stammered. "The bank they called about the second mortgage. They're gonna foreclose. We're gonna lose the house. Can you come back home? We need you." I closed my eyes, and for a moment, a decade of my life flashed before me, every bill I'd paid, every weekend I'd sacrificed, every dollar I had poured into that house, into their lives. I heard their voices in the dining room, telling me my place was in the basement or on the street. "No, Dad," I said, and the word was not an act of anger, but an act of liberation. It was the easiest and the hardest thing I had ever said. "I gave you and that house everything I had for 10 years. You chose Ethan's fantasies and Tiffany's lies over me. You're on your own now." He started to plead, a desperate, rambling sound, but I ended the call. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't their engineer, their builder, or their safety net. I was just myself. And I was finally, completely, free. The next morning, I emailed the audio file of Tiffany's confession to Detective Martinez. It was the final piece of the puzzle. She was apprehended 2 days later at the airport, trying to board a one-way flight to a country with no extradition treaty. But justice for her crimes couldn't undo the damage. I drove to my parents' house one last time. I found them sitting at the dining room table, buried in a sea of official-looking envelopes. The numbers were catastrophic. The second mortgage was for nearly $300,000. Their retirement savings, over $250,000 meticulously saved over 40 years of work, were gone. The foreclosure notice from the bank was sitting on top of the pile. They had 30 days to vacate the property. Caleb looked up at me, his face gaunt. "Abby, you have to help us. Please. We have nothing. We have nowhere to go." I looked at the three of them. The brother who had mocked me, the father who had dismissed me, the mother who had enabled it all. "Help you?" I asked, my voice calm and devoid of pity. You told me to stand on my own 2 feet. So I did. This is the consequence of your choices, not mine. Dad finally spoke, his voice raspy with shame. I was a fool, Abigail. I was so proud I thought your brother had finally made it. I wanted to believe it so badly. I was wrong. His confession was 10 years and $500,000 too late. You didn't just trust her, Dad, I said, meeting his gaze for the first time without flinching. You chose her over me. Every single day. I can't fix that for you. My mother reached for my hand, her own trembling. Please, honey. We're going to be homeless. I pulled my hand back. I tried to tell you, Mom. I begged you to listen. You told me not to make trouble. Well, the trouble is here now. Her sob was a wounded, broken sound, but it couldn't erase a decade of being made to feel invisible. I couldn't be their solution anymore. Walking away from them that day was the most painful, necessary act of my life. They had built their world on a foundation of denial and favoritism. Now, they had to live in the wreckage. 6 months later, I was standing with Carla on the balcony of my apartment, looking out at the Austin skyline. I had just been made lead engineer on a massive city infrastructure project, a new bridge connecting the east and west sides of town. My life was quiet, stable, and entirely my own. The house was gone, sold at a foreclosure auction. My parents and Ethan were living in a cramped two-bedroom rental on the far side of town. Dad was driving for a ride-sharing service. Mom was cleaning houses part-time. Ethan was stocking shelves at a big box store, all his arrogance stripped away, replaced by a quiet desperation. They were surviving, but the comfortable life I had subsidized for a decade was gone forever. Looking back, the lesson is painfully clear. Family isn't an obligation to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. True family are the people who value your light, who see your worth, and who stand beside you, not on your shoulders. In losing the family I was born into, I found a chosen family in friends like Carla, people who celebrated my strength instead of exploiting it. I had to let their world collapse to finally build my own, and the foundation of this new life, the one I built for myself, is as solid as rock. Thank you for listening to my story all the way to the end. It's not an easy thing to share, but I believe sharing our experiences is how we heal and help others see they're not alone. Setting boundaries, especially with the people we're supposed to love unconditionally, can feel like the hardest thing in the world. But sometimes, it's the only way to save yourself. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose your own well-being over the expectations of your family? What did that experience teach you? I would be honored to read your stories and your insights in the comments below. Let's create a space where we can support each other. And if my story resonated with you, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you won't miss any new stories. Your support means the world and helps these messages reach those who need to hear them most. Thank you.